very much. And I think until we start the presentation and we can see the first slides, I also want to say a little bit about the history and how it came to this. So I think the first time we talked was about 3 years ago. And it was the situation when I was on the search for a home for the OpenX, what you've seen right now before from Mr. Espenfeld. And he presented to me the idea of the ENVITED marketplace. And I thought this is something really great. It's because if you have standardized data, or if you have standards, just imagine this situation, you have standards, but nobody's using them. So there are different ideas on how people can be incentivized to use a standard. I mean, you can write it in an offer. BMW can say, if you deliver that for me, please use its standard. You can form a group of, like in ASA, and say, if we 10 companies develop that together, we also commit on using the standard. You can have it from a regulatory side, that some government says, if you provide some data or some results of a test, please make sure you're using a standard. And I think I'm looking a little bit more from the developer perspective. I want to make it appealing to use a standard. So I want people to have fun using standards. It should be in their daily work. It should be something that just comes natural to them. And the question on why we actually really need these standards, and now I'm looking for that, is, and by the way, we call that concept, so that's a working title. We call it open proof. The reason you really need standards is because the actual complexity in developing an autonomous driving function is not developing the function, but actually finding metrics that prove that it's working. So when we talk about standards, finding a metric is very complicated, but defining the basis and the input for this metric is also very complicated. So because you need to have control over the data that derives the result that you're using to prove something. So that's in the context of ASA. So now, if I say, you have to imagine you're a developer of a function that has to follow a lane. So you're seeing the side lanes. And in addition, you have to keep the distance to the car in front of you. So and you're writing this function and you say, okay, I have to get a feeling on how good this is. So the first thing that you can do is you take the code, you flash it into the car, and you just go out to the street and you do it. But this is very complicated, and you're not doing this process 20 times a day. So what you need is some virtual environment that gives you feedback on that. So that's why we need virtual testing. And while developing this function, I have to define when did I reach the point where I was successful. So in success in this case can, for example, be measured by a KPI that says, over the time of a drive where I'm driving along and maybe there's a car in front of me that came too close, was that I came under a certain threshold. So that's my KPI, the distance to the car in front of me. So, and I'm defining this KPI, and I'm having a build system in the background that runs that scenario and measures that specific KPI. And if I didn't go under that threshold, I was successful. And that secures the functionality of the code that I wrote. And that's also important because imagine you have 1,000 people working on functionality. You can be sure that all the others are trying to break your function. And this KPI is protecting your functionality. And it inherits So it brings the first step of safety into that functionality. So I made a presentation at the OSS 5, and you can just go on YouTube and Google and type Carlo van Driesten, and you will see it. So it goes very much into on the level of why you need modeling and why are standards used and needed. So I will just make a brief overview on the most important things that I said there to make you understand what we will show right now. Is that if you have that virtual environment, you've seen that you need the buildings, you need the networks of the road, you need the models of the car, you need the definitions of the material. Is that glass? Is that concrete? Or is that something else? And how does my radar look at these materials? And all of that, it needs to be somehow in a simulation tool. And there's a wide variety of simulation tools that are out there. So, and we've seen the different components. So there's flowing in a map. There's also flowing in a city model. So you have models of Munich and the map that has been measured and is lying underneath. You have the material properties, maybe 10 different kinds of concrete, because you need that for that specific function. You have to decide on what kind of road, for example, you are, to have a prediction on the friction, for example. You need to define the scenario, so the dynamic part of that scenario. Some are static and some things are moving, and you have to describe the movement. And you do all of this because in the end, you have somewhere a tier 1 that is delivering a component for that virtual world. So in this case, maybe I'm building a function that brakes in a certain distance to a car in front of me, and the tier 1 is building the camera that detects this car. So I need the model of this specific car from that tier 1. And he delivers that model and he brings it to me. And I integrate it also, and I additionally integrate my function. And in order to make this work, we've seen that we have a lot of companies that work together worldwide, and these are 300 now in ASAM, which is amazing, is that we need kind of certification. So there are organizations that define what is the right way to define a map or a scenario. And we have to agree on that. And we have to agree on it because we're working on it together. It's not BMW alone that it's building the whole chain. It's we have to enable others to understand what we mean. And all of this we're doing because we have to, in the end, prove it to someone. It's not just for fun. But there are authorities who want to know if it's correct what we're doing. So, and when I'm talking to people, everybody says, oh, we have a lot of data and we have a lot of scenarios and we have it on our database. Okay, so there are databases in China, there are databases in Japan, in Germany, and France has a database. So everybody has a database. So, and everybody thinks that they have the database with the most important scenarios. So I think it's okay, everybody should keep their databases, but we need a way to kind of interconnect them. So the first thing is that we try to define the standards for what is in there. But now we have to kind of interconnect it. So I have the vision of kind of making the next step here. I want to create an ecosystem of all these different participants that are using ASAM standardized data, and exchange them between each other to enable building functionality and providing something to their users and customers. And that was the moment when I remembered the ASCS and the ENVITED. And I thought, maybe that's a great concept to develop on. So we thought this should be somehow a distributed ecosystem. So we need some kind of a settlement layer that interconnects all of this. So there are transactions. You see, there are data flows. someone handing over a map, someone verifying it and giving it some additional information, somebody that buys it, somebody that uses it, that brings a proof to someone. So it's a chain of proofs and of usage that we're having and that we in the end give to an authority. So I want to enable people to validate this chain, to an authority to validate it. So we categorized all of these different companies into their roles. We said there is a data creator, there's someone that distributes it, there's someone that verifies it, there are people that enable it, that build simulation tools, research institutes, inspectors, and there's governance of this whole system and market, and that is what the ASCS is for. It is membership driven, so it gives governance and a body to that market where we can decide on the common rules that we agree on. So, and it has to be optimized. It must be quality. It must be a lot of data because we need a lot of data. It must be efficient and it must be traceable. And traceable is something which is very important. Because imagine somebody asking for a proof of a functionality. And you say, no problem, I have an Excel sheet here under my desk and it proves that we did all of this. They said, I think you did this yesterday. And I said, no, you have to believe me, we did this the last year. So there has to be some kind of proof in time and space that certain components have been used and that I actually did this test with these components to have trust. So I need traceability and trust and transactions. And these are, that should ring a bell here. It's a settlement layer that enables transaction, trust, and traceability. So, and this is where blockchain technology is coming into place. And I think I actually found a use case for that. So we have these different roles here. And those roles, they are somehow connected through a software landscape of independent tool vendors that have it as their job to interconnect them with each other. And they have their databases and you're using this blockchain technology as a settlement layer to keep it very abstract. The overall idea is that because we are having a very diverse ecosystem, it's different companies of different sizes, different markets, different countries. They have different interests. Someone to sell something, someone to prove something. So there is not that natural trust between them. They are rivals sometimes. So this is why they need to have this technology as a trust basis. And we do this when we interconnect this. We maybe take ENVITED, the ENVITED marketplace, as that one spot where people can find data. And we've seen an example today where we tunnel through that ENVITED marketplace to the 3D mapping marketplace. And I think there was something that maybe you remember is say you have to log in again. Okay? So there's actually something that makes it a little bit inconvenient to use it because we have to have two different usernames and you have to log in again. And I don't think that if I buy something on the 3D mapping marketplace that I have a trace of that in the ENVITED marketplace yet. So I want that everybody in this world who thinks that they can create a great market for maps and city models and whatever, they can do this. And we interconnect them with each other and we make it traceable on what components have been used. And on the top of that, there's the governance of the ASCS that makes sure that all of that is going well and we can have understanding on how to do this. So that may be a little bit abstract. So that's why we also brought a concept here that we want to show today. And to just make it clear, the goal of all of this is that we want to create high quality data to develop great functionality with safety and to prove it that it's actually working like this. And just to make a small excursion, this proof is something, and this is actually the process that we're trying to facilitate here, is that we have some legal requirements, and we have a process called homologation, and we keep it fuzzy like that. So the result of that homologation is that we have documents and we have steps to fulfill, and in the end there is an audit of all of that. And in this audit we prove that we kept all the compliance and we used all the processes and documents, and then somebody says, okay, you're allowed to bring that car to the street. And the change that we are having also with our new cars is that this proof is somehow something that comes from a tree of different proofs. So we have components in there, and we have function, and we have a whole system of these proofs. And we need to integrate this together, consolidate it to a common, so a consolidated proof. And if we think of cars of something that was a physical machine before, where we have mechanical parts, now software is something that dominates. And maybe there's something that is, I think, completely common now, is that you make a software update on your car and it has new functionality. That's basically a new car. So that means that a car that before you bought one and 1 year later you have a new car and then you buy this one, you make this process twice. And now, and every time that I'm doing the software update, I basically have a new car and I have to do this process again, and that's very cumbersome. So that also means that because of that, not only because we are updating that very often, it's also that we have very complex functionality. That means maybe before we have a checklist and we say, did they do this? Yes, 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 okay, it's safe. So now we have a very complex hypercube of tests that are somehow interconnected with each other, and where you have to prove the overall correctness. And that's for a person, a human person, it's not perceivable that they cannot overlook this whole process. So what we now see is that there is a large tree behind that of components and things that we need, and we have to trace and track that somehow. So this homologation process is somehow, it needs something to help it be more efficient. So we want to have a continuous proof of validation in there that gives us somehow an automated certificate, which is part of that process, just part, not that process itself, but part of it, which can be audited with the press of a button, and you can verify what's happening there. So if you update the software, there's something happening automatically, and in the end there comes out the proof. So we thought about the idea of open proof, which should be a public standard related to proving correctness, and the invited ecosystem of tools that are created here. And in this open proof, it should kind of be a supplement for that process and make it possible to give a digital certificate on that complex structure of components that we are using in such a proof. So on top we have the ASIM standards that we're using, standardized data. We kind of have the open proof that may prove the usage of the different components, that standardized components. And we put a little proofs in time in space on that blockchain, so that we have a public notary somehow of that we did this. So why should we use a public blockchain? It's a notary function. It's not something, maybe I'm just giving one hint here. There are people that say, oh, we could do a blockchain and let's do it with Daimler, Volkswagen, and BMW together. That would be a nice idea. So I think all of them, they have their own, they have a lot of lawyers and they can make contracts. So I don't think that they really need a blockchain like this. And because there is no imbalance in power between them. They can make contracts between each other. But a small startup in BMW, that's more critical because the startup wants to concentrate on their software and not spend their money on lawyers. So you have an imbalance, just one example. And making a private blockchain or something is like building the internet just for YouTube. So it's ridiculous to have an infrastructure just for one purpose. So we need a public one. And what kind of blockchain could we use? We need some blockchain that has a professional community, that has sophisticated, verifiable smart contract, verifiable because we're talking about safety here, and smart contracts because all of these interactions that I've had shown before, that transaction of bringing data from one to the other and verifying it, it must be somehow automated. There's one technology that we built a demonstrator on that is called the Tezos technology, and which comes from Paris. And that's actually a little Easter egg here, because we will make a working group here at the ASCS for that invited ecosystem. And one of the first excursions that we will do is to bring you a little bit closer to that type of technology, because I don't think that most people don't really know about that. So I organized that we will be able to go to Paris and visit one of the teams that is working on that distributed technology in nomadic labs. So let's see, what is the scope of the prototype? We take an HD map, we verify it, we integrate it into the ecosystem, somebody buys it, and we can audit it. Simple. And for that, we have a technology partner here. And yeah, I would give you now the time to show what you've done.
Presentation rights, yeah. So yeah, I am Pierre from the CEO of Algedonic Loop. We are a startup directly at the intersection of what Carlo has been talking about. The intersection on the one hand of simulation, data exchange, automotive process, etc. And on the other hand, blockchain technology and other advanced technologies to make that kind of happen. And as part of the discussions with ASCS and BMW and some other companies involved, we try to draw up a picture of a small proof of concept and of technology demonstrators that we are building anyway, to kind of show how this might be working and what direction technology needs to take in order to actually fulfill this kind of vision. So what you see here is the invited marketplace as it currently is. We know there are lots of channels and other parts, but we are now focusing on the modules part of the data market that you can see here. And we just scroll down and take a look at one of the examples, for example, this map of crossing in Frankfurt, an intersection of the motorway there, which is provided by Atlatech, and then you get some information about that. And if you scroll down a bit, you get some metadata on that. So what kind of file is it? Where is it placed? What are its attributes and so on? And you get some kind of preview. So product overview, might look at a video, and yeah, there's a download area. And if you are a partner, you might even be able to download it. Or you can request information about this product, as we see here. So that's what you can see in the marketplace. Now the question comes, where does this data come from? So how does it reach the marketplace? Because if we want to have traceability, we want to start at the beginning. For that, we switch to this Visual Studio Code. And here you can see the XODR file as XML. We're just using Visual Studio Code here because we know that developers, for example, like to use these kind of integrated development environments, and really we want to reduce the kind of friction that they have in interacting with the kind of solution. And now we can go to the Open Proof tab of that, and it gives you an overview of what you see in the catalog, of what you have created, and of stuff that you have purchased. And what we can now do is we switch to different user profiles. So now we have the creator role. We want to create data. We are the kind of map makers. And we have switched to that kind of environment and that kind of account and have access to OpenProof. And what we can now do is, of course, we can take this piece of data and we can, at a certain point in time, we can say, okay, we want to register that in OpenProof. This is the point in time we want to freeze this data into something that can be identified, and it can be identified here by this kind of hash. So we are using content hashes that identify data based on their content. So as long as the content stays identical, that hash will identify it. You can always prove to yourself that the data you got is this piece of data, it's not something else. And if we do that and we start registering that data with OpenProof, what is happening is a transaction is executed on the blockchain. And now we have seen the result of that. And as you can see, now we have a new creation. We have the Kreuz Frankfurt sample with metadata that we selected beforehand, and it's registered. And once it is registered, the next step that I can take is I can request publication, because we have seen we have multiple roles. We have the role of the data creator, but we have also the role of the publisher. And if I, as a creator, say, okay, I register that and I want to send it out into the world to a certain extent, I want to contact the publisher and tell them, yeah, you can publish it. And I do this by requesting publication of that and I direct it to a certain publisher, and then this information again moves onto the blockchain, and again the publisher can, for example, look at these kind of requests and can do the checks that he needs to do in order for us to do this. So it is still registered, but the moment this transaction goes through, we see we are in requested state, and we can now switch to the role of publisher. So for demonstration purposes, you can do all of that in one tool, in one kind of setup. In reality, it would be multiple people doing it in multiple tools. We'll see examples of that later on. And what you can do as a publisher, once you have ascertained that it meets your publication criteria, it has the sufficient metadata associated with it, and what other kind of criteria you want to have, you can start the publication process. And at that point in time, this piece of data becomes available through you as the publisher across the marketplace that you are attached to. And of course, what we are not showing here, we are showing the interaction with the blockchain. In the back end, we have seen we need identity management, and that's going to be a very big concern for small and large customers, and that needs to be done. But also we need the kind of data distribution layers that allow you to actually distribute the data efficiently in the background based on the transactions that happen on the blockchain. But for now, let's concentrate on the proof part, so on the transactions that have been executed. So now this is published, and we see it is now in the catalog. The next step, of course, is, as we've seen, if I have data, that's nice and handy, but what I really want to have is data that has been verified to a certain extent. And now we play the role of a metadata creator in our ecosystem that has run a schema validation check or some other more interesting syntactic or semantic check on the data. And what that metadata provider wants to do is he wants to register that metadata as applying to this version of this data item, because it's his statement that he has verified that the data meets certain criteria that he has checked, and he wants to publish that information onto, again, the OpenProof chain. And what happens in the background then is, of course, the same kind of metadata is being registered. We have seen the process for data. For metadata, it's very similar. You can register data, so that just proves that you had access to the data at that point in time. You can request publication, and it can be published, which makes it available to other people. And once we have registered it, we can now see that attached to this data item, we have this metadata item that has been attached. And again, from registered, we can request publication and so on. We won't go through the details of that, and maybe someone else will do some more interesting check, not just checking for syntactic stuff, but for example, for drivability. Are you able to drive on these roads as they are defined? And again, all of this can be put onto the chain, and the transactions form a proof that certain stuff happened at certain points in time by certain people. Now, once we have gone through this, I mean, we did more than this. We also added some other metadata and so on. The question now is, all nice and handy that is here, how does this influence the invited marketplace that we saw earlier? Because we already have that kind of data item on there, so what's the impact for those people? And if we now switch to back to this website, what we can do, we can enable an overlay of our own development that enables access to the open proof chain based on the content of the data of the website as it is. So the moment we have identified that this data item is now available via open proof, you get the purchase on open proof button here, but you also get all of this metadata that you can see from the open proof blockchain. So we can see the content hash, we can see the keys that were used to create it, to publish it, and so on. We get some additional metadata that has been signed, so it is permanently attached to the data. And we see an overview of the metadata products that are associated. So we have this XODR checked that we published right now. And we imagine we have a drivability check by HLRS or whoever wants to get into the game of doing drivability checks, and they can publish this. And one other thing that we have to develop is, for example, business cases for the metadata providers to actually provide that metadata and get paid for their efforts as well. And the moment we have all of this, we can purchase this by pushing this button and starting the purchase process, which again creates a transaction. And we now switch to the console application of Algedonic Loop, which is an application web app that works for multiple roles again. We now take the auditor role because we want to actually see what has happened, what have I shown just now. And what you can see here is you can see the audit trail in basic form. That shows that we created data, we got a request for data publication, we got a request to allow the data publication, metadata was created and published, metadata again was created and published, so different ones, and it was bought, so the data was bought, not the metadata, which you could also buy. And of course, this is a very basic view that we are currently showing. But of course, the interesting part in the technology work will be to actually create views that really help auditors to do auditing of that, to really provide automatic checking of this, and to show you that all of this is happening on a live blockchain, so on a public blockchain. We have moved to the smart contract that actually is behind this demonstration. And what you can see here is the actual transactions that were executed into this smart contract to actually create this proof of work. And again, the idea here is really to take the blockchain technology as it is and to integrate it in a form that actually can be integrated into the processes and tools of all of the market participants in a way that's as transparent as possible. So the last thing you want to do is you want to hack around with the blockchain technology as it stands now. You really want to integrate that, for example, for the identity management. You really want to have single sign-on with the company accounts. You want to have automatic creation of the private keys, automatic key escrow, so that if people leave the company still has access and stuff like that. You want to have an automatic data distribution layer behind that, so that actually only people who have bought the stuff can get access without having to prove again that they have, or to work with keys or download stuff and so on. And really, that's the focus that we at Algedonic Loop have in the upcoming months, is to really drive this technology in this direction, to really show that what Carlo said, that this might actually be an application for blockchain that makes sense, really is true in the end. So that's been our focus here, and that's going to be our focus working with our partners as ASCS and in the automotive industry to actually move this step further, to make this kind of vision closer to reality than it currently at least is. So really that's what we've shown. If you switch back and I give you back control.
Yeah, thank you very much. So what have we seen right now? We basically have seen that there was a map that has been created by someone, and that map was registered on a live public blockchain. It is a test network, okay, but this is a live public blockchain. And it was registered at the account of the ENVITED marketplace, which is part of the ecosystem. And then what happened in the background, what was mentioned, is that there is obviously a data distribution layer that transfers that specific product to the invited marketplace to make it publishable. So they checked it and published it. So then there was someone else, someone who verified that data. They verified it, and we call it the drivability test, whatever it is. So obviously someone can drive on that map, and we made a syntax check on that. So the syntax check is somehow the certification. Is that really an open drive map? Yes, it is. So we take the results of these tests, build a checksum over it, and we attach it as metadata to that product. Then we have seen that that this registered product and published product with its metadata is available through the invited marketplace. And when I hit the button, it was purchased. And I was able to download it, and there was in the end an audit trail that proved that all of this happened. So now you can imagine that with the tools and the possibility that we have together here at the ASCS working together, we can create an ecosystem that gives much more capability to this. And this tree of proofs that you've seen before, which was very complicated, it melts down to a very easy audit trail. This is automatically traceable. So if you're interested in that, I welcome you to contact Mr. Walser and to join our working group that we will build here. And I think you can ask Pierre to show you the demonstration to get some insights on what we're doing. And if you are part of the working group, or you want to be part of that working group, you will get an invite to get more insights on blockchain technology from a core developer team. Okay, thank you very much.